What's going on, everybody? Mortem here, this time bringing you a Druid build for Diablo 4. As I'm playing the game to review it, I thought it would be fun to share the build I've been running through the game with, as I kind of landed on something that was exactly what I wanted, but also really fun. And while I have no real idea where this will wind up in terms of the meta and everything, as everyone is officially jumping into the title now, it's nonetheless a blast, and I've been having a lot of fun with it. As you can see on screen, this of course involves being a werewolf, as well as dealing a ton of poison and physical damage. Though realistically, the poison is sort of star of the show, and thanks to a few abilities and Paragon trees, as well as some items, we can push this to some really fun heights. So with no further ado, let's actually dive into this thing. The first thing I want to talk about is skills. Now for the most part, we're going to be picking the obvious werewolf stuff. As our first ability, we're going to pick up Claw, which is our basic attack generator. We will eventually max this out, as well as upgrade it to increase the attack speed as well as poison enemies over 6 seconds. The damage there isn't as important as the poisoning itself. On our second grouping of skills, we're going to pick up Shred. This is one of our main damage abilities, one of two really. It is a 3 attack combo with the ending of it performing a very large finisher and with an upgrade also poisoning the enemy. We're going to max this out as well as get the upgrades for it, which will increase its attack speed, add a little bit of lifesteal in there, as well as the poison damage that I mentioned. The third grouping of skills, or the defensive skills, is where we have some options. Personally, I wind up picking Blood Howl as well as Cyclone Armor. Blood Howl, we're going to max out. Upgrade-wise, we want to choose the one that is going to increase our attack speed by 15% for 4 seconds, as well as the base upgrade, which reduces the cooldown by every kill for 1 second each. Now, when it comes to Cyclone Armor, we're only really going to put 1 point in this if you choose to use it. We're not using this for the damage or anything. It just gives us a bit of nice damage reduction, and with a legendary power, we can even include physical damage on top of its non-physical damage reduction. But the main thing we're getting this for are the upgrades to it, which will knock enemies back as well as slow them by 70%, and the upgrade that will cause them to become vulnerable or take more damage for 3 seconds. That combined with an 18-second cooldown is a relatively quick way to give you some breathing room in heavy situations, which we'll talk about. But if you don't want to use Cyclone Armor, you could potentially use Debilitating Roar on this tree as well, which is technically a werebear form, but there is a legendary power for this as well that will cause it to immobilize enemies that are affected by our werewolf poisons. And while I prefer the Cyclone Armor, Debilitating Roar is a valid choice as well. Now, when it comes to our animal companion choices, we're going to pick up Poison Creeper. As you might have guessed, it does poison damage. On a 20-second cooldown, we can activate it to both immobilize enemies as well as deal a ton of poison damage. Both the root and the poison damage are incredibly high, and we're going to buff that to the extreme. Upgrade-wise, we're going to pick the option to increase the active poisoning duration, but the upgrade for this one isn't wildly important. If you would like to choose the other one that gives you extra crit strike chance against the immobilized enemies by this, that's also pretty valid. Of the two, though, I preferred the extra poison duration in my own playtime, but the choice is yours. Now, for our Wrath group of skills, we're going to pick up Rabies, but we're only going to put 1 point in this. We're also going to grab the upgrade that spreads it 100% faster, as our goal here is not to deal damage with Rabies, but to poison everything and very, very quickly. This is going to help us spread poison on top of what we're already doing when Poison Creeper is on cooldown. Now, for the ultimate group of skills, we're not going to take anything out of this at all, actually. I tried messing around with this build using Lacerate, but I found that the very high cooldown makes it undesirable, plus the damage isn't really that great. The main reason I was enjoying using it was the little bit of immune status that it gives you while its duration is in effect, but I found that Cyclone Armor is actually better to use here for that because it will knock enemies away from us as well as grant us damage reduction. So that, on top of it just having a shorter cooldown, means that the Werewolf ultimate is not very good for us, and we won't be using equipment or anything that's going to beef up any of the other ultimates, so none of the ultimates are of use to us. For our key passives, we can only pick one, and the one we want is Bestial Rampage. After being a werewolf for 2.5 seconds, we'll gain 20% attack speed for 15 seconds. Thanks to an item we're going to get, this will have a permanent uptime, but even without that item, it will still be up basically all the time, so this is effectively just 20% free attack speed. Now, in terms of passives, I like to pick up the Spirit Generation, which is our resource, just because it makes our life a little bit easier, and we're going to max both of those out. On that same tree, we're going to grab the passive that gives us the extra crit strike chance, which is just nice. Then from our defensive trees, we are going to grab the Ancestral Fortitude passive. This just gives you extra resistances, which is nice. And on our companion tree, we're going to grab the passive that gives us 30% bonus damage to our companion, which is incredibly useful. And then we're also going to pick up 2 ranks of Clarity, which is going to give us 4 spirit every time we transform into a human. Both Poison Creeper as well as Cyclone Armor will turn you back into a human when you activate this, which is going to help you with spirit generation. And then the last big passives are the ones in the Wrath tree that are going to slow enemies by up to 1/4 when they are poisoned by us, on top of an upgrade here that will also give us even more poison damage over time. So that's pretty much what you're looking at skill-wise, and as you could tell, we're focusing a lot on poison. In fact, much of the gameplay revolves around poisoning everything as much as possible and then using Poison Creeper to really push through an incredible amount of poison damage. And with some items and everything, all of this done right, we'll be killing enemies with poison before you can even look at them. But that still requires a few more things. Next up, we're going to talk about Druid Boons. At level 15, we start getting these, or at least start gathering the resource for them. But once you do the class quest required to unlock them and get all of them unlocked, we'll be able to pick passive buffs from spirits to help us out. For the most part, you can only pick 1 each, but you can get 1 extra one for 1 particular spirit animal, and I recommend that one be the avian one. Now, for the snake boon, we're going to pick up Masochistic because it's the only one that helps us out. It's going to allow us to get some healing from our shape-shifting skills, which is nice. The single most important one is actually the one from the wolf spirit, and that is Pack Leader. This is going to give us the lucky hit effect of having critical strikes potentially reset the cooldown of our active companion skill. This means we'll be able to poison things with Poison Creeper even more often. Basically, if we crit strike, we'll have a chance to refresh the cooldown, which is going to let us bypass the 20-second cooldown that the Creeper has otherwise. Pack Leader is incredibly effective for this build, easily the most important choice here. Then we have the Bird Spirit. We're going to pick up Scythe Talons for the increased crit strike, as well as Swooping Attacks for the extra attack speed. And then for the Deer, we're going to get Advantageous Beast, which is going to reduce the duration of control impairing effects, mostly because the Deers are all defensive in nature and none of them are very good. However, eventually you will hit the Paragon levels, which requires you to be level 50, at which point you will stop getting skill points and start earning Paragon points. Luckily for us, there are a few things you can do with the Paragon board that will feed directly into this build and give us some really incredible poison damage that has been making my runs through the World Tier 3 and Nightmare and everything just a breeze. But as you can see on screen here, from where we start on our starting board, we're going to go up the right and basically just focus on the damage nodes before cutting across the middle to grab the glyph slot. And in the socket, we're going to put the werewolf glyph. You won't have this right away. You will have to run some dungeons and find the werewolf glyph, but it's the one you want. Every willpower node that we purchase within the red area there is going to increase our werewolf form damage, and eventually, once we get enough willpower, we'll actually get some damage reduction on top of that too. We want to put this right here just because there's a lot of willpower nodes all around this one, which makes it a great choice for this spot. Then we're going to continue up the left side of the board, grabbing more and more of the damage nodes before we get to the gate slot, which is going to allow us to put down a new Paragon board. When you get to this point, you will actually get to choose one of 8 boards to use, and the one you want is called Heightened Malice. And you also want to put it in the configuration you see here on the screen. You'll be able to adjust it, that is to say rotate it to fit accordingly. What we want to do is get Heightened Malice, the legendary node, on the bottom right, so we can very quickly get to it. Heightened Malice pushes this build to new heights, because while there are 3 or more poisoned enemies nearby, we're going to deal 45% increased damage. And because of all the ways and means we're going to be poisoning everything around us, this is basically just a free 45% increased damage unless you're fighting a single enemy. But even bosses typically summon in enemies, so even in those situations, you'll probably get to use this more than you think. However, from there, we want to pick up the magic nodes nearby, which are going to give us poison resistance as well as some max life. But we're not going to grab all of them, just the ones you see on screen here, because we don't need a ton of that. But then we are going to cut up through the middle of the board to grab the damage to poison enemy, magic, and rare nodes in the middle of this board, before continuing up further to the left to grab the second glyph socket, which I have put Outmatch in. Outmatch is going to give us a flat bonus to the rare nodes within range, and the one we want is just north of this one, which is going to give us more damage to poisoned enemies as well as some extra willpower. So we'll be grabbing up all of these magic and rare nodes as well for more damage to poisoned enemies. Now, once I got these, I made a point to go back and fill out my glyph slots. That is to say, make sure I get the bonuses from them. So in the case of Outmatch here, I stopped to pick up enough dexterity nodes nearby to make sure that I'm also getting that extra 16% increased physical to non-elites and bosses. I then doubled back to the werewolf glyph and picked up enough willpower to trigger that one as well. After that, you'll be moving south a little bit to the magic and rare nodes on the bottom left on the heightened malice board, because that is more damage to poisoned enemies. After which, we will finally be moving on to another board. But at that point, you're going to be like level 70, 80, so I'm sure you get the gist from here. We're still not done yet, a few things to talk about still, which is mainly what to do gear-wise. Now, thanks to both the very powerful Paragon boons that we're going to grab, as well as some unique equipment we're going to use, this build really starts to come together in World Tier 3 or level 50 and above, basically. Before that, you just want the best stuff you can find of some of the legendary aspects we're going to be talking about. But eventually, the main thing you want to get your hands on for this build is called Mad Wolf's Glee, which is a unique item, and it's relatively common for as rare as uniques are supposed to be, as I've already found like 4 or 5 of these things. But they are perfect for our build. It increases our physical, poison damage, our movement speed, as well as just giving us +2 ranks to all of our werewolf skills, which is going to give us some extra damage out of things like rabies, even though we didn't upgrade that one. Combine that with upgrading the item itself, as well as adding some sockets to it, and you've got a really powerful piece of equipment for this build specifically. Now, outside of that though, there are still some legendary items that are very useful for us, and aspects you want to keep an eye out for. First up, we have Stormclaw, which is going to cause critical strikes with Shred to deal 40% of the damage as lightning damage to the target and surrounding enemies. And while the lightning damage of this honestly isn't ideal, legendary powers for what we're looking for are relatively sparse, so this is one of the only ones that affects Shred directly, which makes it beneficial by default. Another favorite of mine is Skinwalker though. This is going to cause all of our shape-shifting skills to grant us 89 life, and because we're going to be bouncing back and forth between human and werewolf form quite a bit, we're going to get a ton of life out of this. And then another really good one is Night Howlers. This is going to cause Blood Howl to increase your crit strike chance by 5% as well, in addition to also affecting your companions, that is to say our Poison Creeper, and other players for 3 seconds. And given that Blood Howl is one of our main defensive abilities, we're going to be getting a lot of use out of that as well. Now, beyond those legendary aspects, the things that you want to really look out for in terms of stats are physical damage, poison damage, attack speed, crit chance, as well as damage over time. If you focus on gear with those stats, those legendary aspects, as well as some of the items I mentioned here, you should be in a pretty good space, as a lot of those stats feed into exactly what we're trying to do. And of course, don't forget to look out to items that just give us flat ranks to the things we're using, like our shape-shifting skills, our Poison Creeper, our companion skills, basically anything that's going to increase the value of what we're already doing. But that is the general gist of how this build starts to come together, and from there I want to talk a little bit about how it performs in combat. Now, thanks to the magic of film editing, the build you're seeing in combat here is a little bit farther along than some of the other footage. I've actually got another unique item that is causing enemies to be chilled as well and granting extra damage against them, which is what all that trailing ice is behind us. But the general strategy here with this build is to poison as many things as possible and letting that very high damage over time tick away on top of hitting them with our shreds. This means typically what we're going to try to do is round up enemies as well as we can and then activate Poison Creeper. Poison Creeper is going to hit a very large AoE. It's going to poison everything in there for very high damage. In fact, most non-elites usually just die immediately to the poison damage. And when it comes to poison damage, we actually know exactly how much poison damage we're going to deal by the different shade of red the health bar turns. Meaning that once their entire health bar is a different color of red, that enemy is going to die. You don't need to continue to attack them. You can actually just get a move on. So unless you need to wait for that particular enemy to die, there's no reason to keep attacking it. Which means a lot of times for smaller, less interesting groups of enemies, you can run up to them, simply hit Poison Creeper, and then walk away if you don't feel like shredding them to death. And thankfully, things like legendary items, etc. all get shipped to your stash if you happen to miss picking them up, so you don't even have to worry about that. Now, Poison Creeper and Shred are our main damage, but in order to use Shred, we have to do basic attacks to generate Spirit. The most difficult part of managing this build is actually your Spirit generation, which is why we took all of those passives, because Shred is a very high cost ability in terms of Spirit, and with a full gauge, you're likely to only be able to use it like once or twice. But altogether, the goal here really is to activate Poison Creeper, as it is our biggest damage dealer by far, against large groups of enemies to deal all of that poison damage, and then shred the remaining enemies from there if they are still alive or they still have portions of their health bar that are not consumed by poison. In addition to this, we can use Rabies to spread the poison further. Rabies, with its upgrade, is going to spread poison to everything almost instantaneously. This means that even if we do not have Poison Creeper on cooldown, we can still benefit from our passive that gives us 45% increased damage by facing so many enemies. Basically, we just want to poison everything as much as possible. When we start to take damage, Blood Howl is going to heal us, in addition to giving us extra crit strike if we have Night Howlers on. Cyclone Armor is going to help us as well in terms of getting some breathing room. As a melee class goes, we are not the tankiest, meaning that another weak spot of this build is if you get surrounded, you might have some problems. It's best to skirt the outside of a group of enemies, but if you happen to get stuck in the middle, this is where Cyclone Armor can help you out, because you can activate that, push all enemies back, make them vulnerable, as well as just give yourself some breathing room for a second, which is just a ton of fun, and it's how I've been really enjoying playing this game, so I wanted to share it all with you today. That said, again, still pretty early on. I don't know where this is going to wind up in the grand scheme of things, but if you want to play a werewolf that is spreading disease and tearing things to shreds with its claws, I think this is a really fun way to do that, and if you try it out, I hope you enjoy it. But that is going to do it for me today. If you liked the video or have any questions, by all means, like, comment, subscribe, all that YouTube jazz, but regardless of any of that, truly, just thank you so much for watching. I really do appreciate it. May you wander in wisdom and have an amazing day.